another episode of the DailyFlip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through a story talking about the Supreme Court letting restrictions on social media companies based on the age of the users. Wow, that's a really convoluted way to say it. Basically, Facebook, YouTube, the Supreme Court is slapping them down saying, guess what? Mississippi's law protecting users and making sure that underage people have to verify what their age is, it stays in place. And it's a little bit controversial. We're going to get into it. But before we do, we want to remind you that we're going to start today with our daily debate. So what is the proper age to start using social media? I'm sure so many people have many different opinions about it. I know I do. I want to hear yours. Throw it down there in the comment section. Not saying, well, we should legally protect what you think is the right age to start using social media. And never is also a possibility. So with that, let's actually get into the article that comes from our friends at the AP. The headline reads, Supreme Court allows Mississippi to require age verification on social media like Facebook and X. Now, for those of you who have paid attention to some of the other content, other places like Australia and New Zealand are also starting to crack down on this. They're starting to have age verification requirements, and Mississippi has a populace that is not necessarily hyper-focused in one area or another. There are, of course, population centers, but they're dispersed, which makes it harder to have social connections. It makes it harder to get out there and interact. And social media for young people can be an avenue towards doing that. Though, as we've learned over an entire decade, if not a little bit more of these companies being around, they incentivize the attention economy and try to force people to stay, and force is a strong word. They encourage people to stay on them. And the younger you are when these sort of things happen, some people argue, and research from people like Mr. Haidt, who did The Ancient Generation, is standing on the bookshelf behind me, would argue that among other factors, social media is a huge detriment to children of this generation. So when you see measures like this that are intended to protect those children, that are meant to curb the worst excesses of these companies, you can't simply dismiss it. Now, of course, the government stepping in, the federal government stepping in and making these sort of bans is an overreach. And having this on a state level is better in that it's closer to the populace that is actually affected by it. But even then, you have to ask, at what point is it okay for any government to step in and do it? I, of course, on a personal level, would prefer that no government steps in and do it, even though this does align, and let's be clear, I know I'm taking the ultra-libertarian stance. It's harder to defend the conservative stance on it, or even a Democrat stance on it. And I mean that in both Republicans and Democrats both identify problems with this. And it's harder to defend that stance because it's a much more nuanced take than it is in defending children and making sure that they are not hurt, damaged by any actions that they inadvertently take. That's not necessarily the hardest argument, but it is harder to make, and the line becomes blurrier than my example, which is the government should be mandating it all, and parents should take responsibility for it. Now, to take a step back, we know that parents can't actually watch every single thing that their children do. So, I mean, I know when I was young, I was taking my parents' phone, one of the newer ones, whatever it may have been, and I was watching YouTube. I was not a perfect child. I was distracted by these dopamine machines, and I still do watch YouTube videos. And if you look at my feed, you're probably going to say, wow, you spend a little bit too much time. Even if it's going on in the background, it's still there, and it's still a problem. So the question is, if these children or anything like us, like me, and they start at I didn't even start at a young age. I got into it a little bit older. Imagine if you start at the age of 8, 9, 10. I have friends who did, and I see the effects, and some of them turned out just fine. They've mitigated the worst parts of it. They're social beasts. They go out there and they drop their phone for a little bit, and other ones are intimately involved with it. Now, there could be other factors outside of the social media itself, but at the end of the day, it is a parent's responsibility to instill the values and mitigate the worst effects of these sort of things, and preferably by not allowing them to have it. Social media, besides YouTube, and even then YouTube being social media, sometimes is a stretch. I see parts of it, especially as TikTok has pressed them to go into more short form content. But the idea would be that children shouldn't have it at all, but it's not because the government says so. It's because we realize the damage that it's doing and we prevent it. We actually limit the social media's power, companies' power, by diluting their market share. And by diluting, that's actually not even the better word. Diluting would imply that we're going to add more social media companies. We're going to allow less restriction by diminishing their overall power, by making sure that they don't have more eyeballs looking at them. And I know it's a hard thing to do. I know plenty of people in my life right now that are having hard times trying to get rid of social media, but there is a conscious effort across our generation to limit social media interaction. I work with a lot of people that don't use social media, but I work with someone directly on a daily basis who only has professional types of social media. And this person, hyper-social, very good at communicating. So I can't say there's a one-to-one correlation, but this person realized it was bad for them and they moved past it. And I think a lot of people in our generation are doing that. Well, guess what? We don't want these children to get to the point where we're at to see the negative effects, to have to see them, even though it is a good life lesson, and maybe there's lessons to be learned beyond the fact that you need to limit yourself sometimes. But we don't want to have them get to the point where we did. And also, we grew up in a median age. We grew up with at the beginning of our lives without some of these technologies, without being fully versed in them, at least having as much access as kids nowadays do, which means that if anything, you can make an argument that we were more prepared. It's the median age. You're adept in these things, or at least knowledgeable enough to pass by and use them without necessarily being fully ingrained and only knowing them. Snapchat's a great example. Snapchat's been around for quite some time, and Snap was popular when I was growing up, but it wasn't essential to communications, and it actually has become partly for our generation that. Of course, you can still reach people outside of it, but nowadays, a lot of people, the people that are just 3 or 4 years younger than me, they don't ask for your phone number first, they ask for Snapchat. There are plenty of other reasons for that, but it has so much ingrained power that I worry if we don't at least mitigate the worst effects and try to protect our children from it, then things of that nature will continue to propagate, and these terrible technologies that waste so much of our time, that suck us in and drain us of the important moments in our life, will continue to exist in the way they do, rather than in a healthy framework. TV was probably a big waste of time too, and now it's a part of everyday life, and it becomes part of the background. Is that a possible healthy relationship like YouTube is? And even then, you could make an argument that TV shouldn't be in the background. You don't need constant noise, but we've adapted beyond the point where it's so enthralling that it takes away your ability to do anything else. Some people would argue otherwise, but to the specifics of this one, because actually I wanted to use this article as a propagator, as a beginning part of a conversation for this broader conversation. If you actually want to read it, you can go down to the link in the description below, that like and subscribe button. Normally I start my spiel, but I had to stop myself there. But the details here are, quote, net choice is challenging laws passed in Mississippi and other states that require social media users to verify their age, and ask the Supreme Court, to keep the measure on hold until the lawsuit plays out. And there was a little bit of back and forth before it actually made it up to the national court. Quote, the federal judge agreed and prevented the 2024 law from taking effect, but a three-judge panel of the Fifth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals ruled in July that the law could be enforced while the lawsuit was proceeding. And it's actually interesting. Kavanaugh, in the undersigned, actually said, quote, there were no noted dissents from the brief, unsigned order. Justice Brett Kavanaugh wrote that there's a good chance net choice will eventually succeed in showing that the law is unconstitutional, but hadn't shown it must be blocked while the lawsuit unfolds. And that's an interesting wrinkle here. I want to see how this one plays out, because he's saying that actually, when it finally makes it up to us, it's probably going to be a law that doesn't hold with the federal Constitution. And yet, the justices felt that in the legal case, and maybe even in the personal case, that the law should stay in place while this legal battle is being fought. I don't know if, like I said, it's a personal or legal perspective, but honestly, I hope it's personal. I hope that they at least address and have some fears about it and really question these companies. And even if they don't use the force of government in order to limit the law, which is actually, it's interesting. They, by going in and saying, hey, we're not going to allow these sort of laws to exist, by enabling Mississippi to maintain and say that it is constitutional, they're actually allowing more overreach, and by the government mandating that the government needs to stop, they're stopping it. So I think that most people would probably think, Alex, you're all for it. But in doing so, in involving themselves in this conversation and really pushing Netscape to explain what's going on here and why what they're doing is unconstitutional, they can bring in some necessary folds about the protections that we need to have for our children and why they're important. And that's the conversation I'll be waiting for when this eventually gets to the court, the actual case. So with that said, like I said, articles linked down in the description below, the like and subscribe button. If you want to follow the podcast on Spotify, Podcast, Podvine, the links are down there. Also down there, you can find the information for the Twitter handle at your Daily Flip, where I post links to these episodes on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and 6 and 6, the international news segment, on Tuesday and Thursday. So with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.